had John Mollison as one of the speakers, and I didn't think he was winded, and I thought I'd try and get my money's worth out of him. So if he'll come up here and tell us another story, I'd appreciate it. He's not that skinny.
I'm setting my timer for an hour. Come on, guys. No, this will be very brief. But when Kim talked to me last April about coming to speak here, I thought it was an honor. And Kim vetted me out. So if you got any problems with him, problems with me, you can take it to Kim. But I asked him what he would want me to say, and he said, well, when you're making your movies, when you're making your films, maybe you got a couple stories that you'd like to share. And so I thought, well, I can do that. Now this morning when we were talking, or this afternoon, when I got to share the educator kit that I developed for George McGovern in the schools, that's really a good example of why we celebrate the past, right? I mean, all these great legacies, and I just got a knowing nod from the historian over there. But you know, there's two other aspects to studying history. But before I do that, I want to share something with you. When I was growing up, and somebody called me a geek, did y'all ever get called a geek?
No, never.
Well, I did. And evidently, I got to gain some weight too and learn how to lift weights according to Kim. But recently, I found out that being a geek is actually a good thing. And there is actually a definition of geek on the internet. And I'm going to give you that definition after I get done telling you a couple stories. The first story is it's a story I want you to know. It's about one of our cameramen who works on my film, my production company. And his name is Dalton. I don't mind telling you about Dalton. But Dalton grew up, I look around here and we're all blessed. I can tell that we all are blessed. But Dalton grew up, much like General, maybe your dad grew up. I think your dad and Dalton would have a lot in common. But Dalton appreciated World War II. And so while he was being left alone, hungry, with no supervision, he would get magazines or something from the library to learn about World War II, and those became his heroes. This is a guy with no connection to World War II. I was doing a film for Boeing, and we were out of Vandenberg in California. And while we were filming out there, I said to Dalton, Dalton, you ever want to meet a World War II hero? Because I know one that just lives a little bit east of Vandenberg. It was an Air Force guy, Army Air Force guy by the name of Jim Kunkel. And I took Dalton with me, and I said, grab your camera, we'll just do an impromptu video. And Jim Kunkel was 9th Air Force. And Jim Kunkel's moment in fame was he was awarded the Air Force Cross. Jim got into a dogfight, one versus between 25 and 35 German airplanes. And the reason we know all that is because his dogfight was at about 3,500 feet, and he was flying right over the Big Red One in Belgium. And it was an incredible moment, highly documented, and he got shot down, burned very seriously, ended up in the war in the flak house. Well, long and the short of it, while we're interviewing Jim, I asked Jim a question that I knew Jim pretty well, but I asked him, I said, Jim, were you ever afraid to go into combat? And Jim told the story, this war hero. I mean, the Air Force Cross is not a small distinction. It's one step below the Medal of Honor. And Jim said that when he got into England, that he was scared to death, and he was wondering whether he could handle it. And he went to the bar with his squadron, went to the pub, and he saw in the corner of the room, he saw a group of RAF pilots. And if you watch Hollywood movies, you get the idea that, you know, this would be a scene where the RAF guys and the Air Force guys would give each other grief, and there might be a little fight, but at the end they all love each other. Well, this wasn't that way. Jim got the courage to walk to the corner and say, you guys know something I don't know. And I'm scared to death. I haven't flown a combat mission. What can you tell me? And it turned out that this little group of 5 or 6, 3 of them were Battle of Britain veterans. And they gave Jim some advice. They said, when you get into combat and you get a Jerry on your tail, that Jerry is going to kill you. That's this mission. It's not fun. And all the stuff you've been learning, and I'm talking to a fighter pilot here, and all the stuff you've been learning about, energy management, blah, 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 it'll go right out the window. So if you want to live, you have to do something violent. I'm going to say that again. If you want to live, you have to do something violent. Conk went off and flew his missions until he got to that day where he had to do something violent. But the long and the short of the moral of this little story, and then I'll get to my next one, was that Dalton Coffey, my cameraman, heard that story. He's a man who grew up without a father, grew up without parents, grew up without leadership. I've had the best leadership in the world. I am highly privileged. But Dalton's had nothing. And Dalton got into a professional situation a couple of years later where he was backed into a corner. Now, when I say he did something violent, he knew, was smart enough to know not to do something physical violent or get himself into trouble. But he did something violent. And he changed his life and his career by taking the advice of an old man that he met and trusted once. Right now, just remember the name Dalton Coffey, because I can't tell you, but he signed a deal with Hollywood. His movie's going to be on a very large home subscription service that you've seen and you pay money for, and it'll be there, but just remember that name. But he's a man who learned from the past and applied it to the future, or himself, to the present. I got a little ahead of myself. The last story I'd like to tell you, and then I'll tell you the definition of a geek, and then I'll give it back to Kim. But the most successful film that I ever produced, meaning awards, audience, and attention, was a film I made of an RAF pilot who had just found out that he was an ace. And he was an old, old man. And the gun camera footage got from the Imperial War Museum, it all checked out. It was an amazing little bit that we made the movie. The movie's called, if you go to my website, johnmollison.com, go to Old Guys in the Airplane, scroll down till you see The Gentleman Next Door. I called John Wilkinson up, and John was not in the mood to have some guy like me come into his home and film him. Except for one thing, he was an old man. And he knew that his time was running out. And he said, I'm going to let you in and tell my story, but I'm going to do it for one reason, and I'm going to tell you why that reason is. And it's going to be kind of sad, it's going to be kind of negative, but I hope it'll inspire you. John explained that when, at the end of the war, I believe this was April 10th, 1945, his squadron was assigned to a forward field in Belgium. No, I think it was Belgium. Jeez, it's getting late for me. And but he was with 41 Squadron. And when he landed his Spitfire, it was a Mark 14, one of the most beautiful aircraft ever made, he shut the engine down, opened up the canopy, and a British Jeep pulled up, and it had a couple of his crew chief in it and one of his armorers. And they said, get out of the plane, you've got to come with us. And John was in the plane, and he gets out, and he's a little tired. It's about an hour and a half hop, but he had enough energy to get out. And what is going on? And they tore off down the road. And what John described to me next has changed my life. Maybe it'll change yours. But it's an important lesson because I think it applies to everybody here. John told me the story of what it was like to get to this place where up ahead he saw some chaos. And when he got to the gate wasn't quite open. And there was a cadre of British soldiers just inside the gate. And somebody had said, they just got here about an hour ago. And what John was able to process, he told this to me. He said, John, I looked down. I was at the gate with my Jeep. More British soldiers are coming in. And I'm looking down, and he goes, I look at the furthest barracks down, and there are people coming out of the barracks. He goes, but they don't look like people. He said, they look like wisps. They were moving just like they were breathing in the air. And when you saw them, they were naked. And they didn't really look like people, but their skin was taut. And he said they were smiling. But I didn't know if they were smiling because the skin was so dry. Or maybe they were happy. He was one of the first people after Bergen-Belsen, the concentration camp, first people to see the liberation of that horrible, horrible place. And the vision and the memories of what he saw scarred him deeply. He got mad at his crewman and said, get me back home, take me to the base. I'm mad at you guys, I never wanted to see this. Fast forward to about, I think it was 2017 when I got to interview him. He said, John, the reason I want you to come and talk to me, he goes, you can film anything you want, we can talk about my gunnery, he was an amazing marksman. We can talk about anything you want, but I just want to let you know, will you include something about Bergen-Belsen? He goes, don't make a big deal out of it. But he said, I'm starting to find out that there are people in this world that are denying what I saw happened. He said, there are these Holocaust deniers. And he said, dude, what's going to happen when I die? Little by little, stories change, facts change, opinions change. You start to doubt things. Personally, me, John Mollison, I've made a whole career in media and public relations. I guarantee you, you have read headlines that I've worked hard to put on the news. I know what it's like, how to get a message across and convince people. John Wilkinson let me tell his story. If he could just keep the real story that there was a Holocaust, there was evil in Germany in World War II. That was enough for him. So I want to close with this. Inside this room, every one of us has an appreciation for history. And I'm looking at you because you're a gatekeeper. I mean, you're one of the stewards. You're the steward of tomorrow. And we have an obligation to tell our stories, even if it is mom and dad or grandma and grandpa. My watch just went off. I have 1.5 minutes left. When an old man dies, a library burns. And I know that a few of you have seen the loss of an uncle, grandpa, grandma, dad, mom. But you are entrusted as part of this group, the 15th Air Force, reunion, organization, whatever your organization is called. But you are the trusted of so many libraries. That when your old man died, a library doesn't have to burn. You can keep that library alive. And I hope when you leave here, you just take comfort that you're around people who are just like you. We share something. Me, I don't have a connection to the 15th like you do. But we are community. Little bits, little ways. And we can keep the libraries of what we know to be good and true, the truth, the facts. Tell them with good context, maybe have a little novelty broken in, but share it with the generations to come. Now, the definition of a geek. I found this out, that a geek is somebody who shares deep and passionate community. Being a geek is a personal thing. Now, I'm a nerd too. I'm a B-24 nerd, I'm an airplane nerd. But the real things that matter is the community that we have. History is nutritious, and when an old man dies, yeah, you know the word. But I want to thank you very much for allowing me into your community. We're all geeks, and I hope to be a part of the welcome for next year when you come to South Dakota. But we're South Dakota, we're a community of people who love our country, and we know that we'll be among friends when you return. Thank you.
Okay, well, we had a memorial this morning, and in times past, we sometimes repeat that, our individual squadrons. Names were read this morning, and there's names on papers, and then there's names with stories. We've got 9 groups here. Does anyone have a particular name that was read this morning that they would share a personal moment about, that means something special to them, family connected to one of the names that was read from one of these groups this morning?
Yeah, I'll bring something up.
Okay.
My name's Dave Webster, if you don't know who I am already, and I bring this display. So if you got any questions or comments, you're welcome to talk to me about it. But what I wanted to bring up, I'm also one of the sympathetic criers, so you'll hear me stumble sometimes. I want to bring up a gentleman named Jack Oliver. So Jack's son is here, Robert, someplace. There you are, Robert. Well, I want to tell you a little bit. You might not know this, and all these folks don't know this, but I'm a complete outsider. I have no association with 15th. I don't have any family members that were attached to 15th. All I did was start collecting Army Air Corps uniforms when I was 15, and I've been doing it ever since. And I was so fortunate to meet Kim, and he brought me along, and I've met so many amazing people. Well, when you're an outsider and you come into a group of tight-knit veterans and their families, it can be a little intimidating. But Jack, I met Jack at the first reunion that I went to, and at every since then, he was, no matter his condition, he tried to show up all the time until the last few years. That was Jack. And Jack would always make a point to come to me and say hello and make me feel welcome, make me feel at home. So Robert, I just wanted to say, it was an honor to meet your father. He was truly an amazing person, and the world is a lesser place without him. So.
Jack was the advisor for the 376 group for many years, and I do not have a wooden nose, but if I did, I would be Pinocchio, and he would be the Jiminy Cricket that was my advisor and my conscience for all the moves and the decisions that I made for the betterment of the group. The one name that we did mention we missed this morning was much like David. He did not have a blood connection to the group, but Bill Mulkins was connected with our group for many years, and we have an archive of 50 boxes at the Pima Air Museum that we will be going to on Tuesday. And for 15 or 20 years, those boxes, for whatever reason, politics, personalities, were not touched. But Bill Mulkins, with his gregarious personality and his better grasp of politics than I have, opened those doors to Pima, and we have begun opening boxes and going through papers and finding just treasures that weren't available to us until Bill made his mark. So we miss him as well. Well, the 98th has this table, and they have their own way of doing their memorial if they're ready to do the missing man.
As you entered the banquet hall this evening, you may have noticed the small table in place of honor. It is set for one. This table is our way of symbolizing the fact that members of our profession of arms are missing from our midst. They are commonly called POWs or MIAs. We call them brothers. They are unable to be with us this evening, so we remember them. This table is set for one, symbolizing the frailty of one prisoner alone against his oppressors. Remember. The tablecloth is white, symbolizing the purity of their intentions to respond to their country's call of arms. Remember. The single red rose is displayed in a vase, reminds us of the families and loved ones of our comrades in arms who keep the faith, awaiting their return. Remember. The red ribbon, tied so prominently on the vase, is reminiscent of the red ribbon worn upon the lapel and breast of thousands who bear witness to their unyielding determination to demand a proper accounting of our missing. Remember. The candle is lit, symbolizing the upward reach of their unconquerable spirit. Remember. The slice of lemon on the bread plate is to remind us of their bitter fate. Remember. There is salt upon the bread cake, symbolic of the family's tears as they wait. Remember. The glass is inverted. They cannot toast with us tonight. Remember. The chair is empty. They are not here. Remember. Remember. All of you have served with them and called them comrades who depend upon their might and aid and relied upon them, for surely they have not forsaken you. Remember. Remember. Until the day they come home, remember.
Well, let's see. I think wind this thing up. Last year, I think we talked about our favorite TV shows, and I brought up mine, which I was going to do something different, and then what John brought up about, it seems like we had protests across our country and our institutions of higher learning, which seem to have failed miserably in teaching anything about history. So that's certainly not the grade card that I would have brought home to my father. So last year I brought up my favorite TV show, and you'll pardon me if I go back to it, and you'll recognize the movie started, or the show started with, "You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of sound, a dimension of sight, a dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. There's a signpost up ahead. You've just crossed over the Twilight Zone." So, yeah, with the recent events in the, as John said, what's in the news, that just made me want to bring up what I repeated last year, if you'll just bear with me. The episode of the Twilight Zone called Death's Head Revisited. Death's Head refers to the skull and crossbone, which is on a Nazi SS uniform. And the episode goes that the commandant of Dachau prison goes back years later under an assumed name to enjoy the memories of his time there. And he's met by a man that he recognizes as a former prisoner. What he doesn't recognize is that the man is a ghost. So the commandant is put on trial by the ghosts of the prisoners that he held there, and he's found guilty of crimes against humanity. And his punishment is that he is going to suffer the pain that he inflicted on others, not physically, but mentally. And when he receives his punishment, it makes him insane. So the episode ends with he's found and sedated and put on an ambulance and sent out of the camp. And the doctor that treats him looks around the camp and he says, "Dachau, why do we keep it standing? Why does it still stand?" And Rod Serling's closing words are, "There's an answer to the doctor's question. All the Dachau's must remain standing. The Dachau's, the Belzons, the Buchenwalds, the Auschwitz, all of them. They must remain standing because they are a monument to a moment in time when some men decided to turn the earth into a graveyard. Into it they shoveled all their reason, their logic, their knowledge, but worst of all, their conscience. And the moment we forget this, the moment we cease to be haunted by its remembrance, then we become the gravediggers. Something to dwell on and to remember, not only in the twilight zone, but wherever men walk God's earth." So, I thought about, I did that last year. If I leave you on that note 2 days in a row, 2 years in a row, you might not invite me back next year. So I watched another Twilight Zone episode, which I hadn't seen this one before. And then this one is called Steel. And a young Lee Marvin, one of his first appearances, is the main character. And Rod Serling's opening is, "Sports item, circa 1974, battling Maxo B2, heavyweight, accompanied by his manager and handler, arrives in Maynard, Kansas for a scheduled 6-round bout. Battling Maxo is a robot, or to be exact, an android, definition, an automaton resembling a human being. Only these automatons have been permitted in the ring since prize fighting was legally abolished in 1968. This is the story of that scheduled 6-round bout. More specifically, the story of 2 men shortly to face remorseless truth that no law can be passed which will abolish cruelty or desperate need, nor, for that matter, blind animal courage." So, Lee Marvin has this older model battling Maxo, of which he takes a lot of jabs at because of its age. But Lee Marvin was once a prize fighter himself, and he defends his robot. He says that, "I put my experience and my skill into this robot, and he can do the job. He's capable." But just before the match, something breaks in battling Maxo, and he doesn't have money and he doesn't have parts to fix the robot. So he dresses up like battling Maxo and he steps into the ring. His partner warns him against it and says it'll kill you, but he won't take no for an answer, and he steps into the ring and he stays on his feet and takes a beating, but he manages to get through 1 round when the fight is called and to keep the charade, and then he's taken back into the dressing room where he collapses. He's only paid half the money because he didn't last 6 rounds, but he tells his partner, "We're okay. We've got money, We can fix Maxo, we can make the next town to the next fight, and it's going to be all right. His partner lifts him off the floor. He doesn't buy into quite the enthusiasm that the man has, but he says, "Steele, you're tough, but put your hand on my shoulder and lean on me." The closing words are, "Portrait of a losing side, proof positive that you can't outpunch machinery. Proof also of something else, that no matter what the future brings, man's capacity to rise to the occasion will remain unaltered. His potential for tenacity and optimism continues, and as always, to outfight, outpoint, and outlive any and all changes made by his society, for which 3 cheers and a unanimous decision rendered from the Twilight Zone." Now, we got the biggest matchup in my lifetime coming up in a week. So don't get so busy living life that you haven't got time to get in line and make yourself heard. Vote early if you can, or be in first in line if you can't. Take 10 people with you, and then pray. Reverend Roberts, you want to pray us out of here?
One of the chapters of my dad's book, Full Circle, he writes about his sergeants. And his father, who was a lieutenant colonel at the time, warned him, if you want to survive when you're deployed, you better get close to your sergeants. And he did. And one after another, those sergeants mentored him, instructed him, and he listened to them. And so there's this networking of, though he's an officer, these men who actually run the services, all of them, all of the sergeants, and here's to all of the sergeants. He, in reflection in his book, he said, these men saved my life. So I just want to say, for me, being connected with all of you has helped to save the appreciation that I did not have as a young man for my father's sacrifice. I don't know how many of you, second generation, third generation, you know little tidbits and snippets about those who've gone before and served. And they don't tell you much about the sacrifice that they made. They just don't mention it in much detail. But when I hear the stories through others, it helps me to realize that I'm connected to something that's way bigger than me. And it's the America that we are a part of. I appreciate so much Major Karn's message this morning when he said, when we have our differences, it ought to be like the pedals on a bicycle, where we are connected, though different. And whereas one party may be above the other at a certain time, the other then may functions as an opposing force that then throws itself up above, and it keeps going, where they counterbalance one another, produce something that is the wonder and the amazing experiment of America. And I'm grateful for that. Grateful for my father, that he fought for this messy America, and that he gave his life service in the military for this messy America. And so tonight, leading up to this election that has divided so many of us, I'd like to give thanks to God for this group and for the men and women who, and I'm talking about, I wrote a piece for the Intelligentsia about the wives of these men who served on the home front and were remarkable, astounding contributors to the success of our war effort on the home side of things. And so for the men and women whose blood runs in our veins, whose sacrifice was made that gives us an appreciation for what America is. Our differences, our agreements, the hope for a bright future. We never give up. We never become these pessimists who say, well, if that party gets in, we're done for. We are never done for. We are Americans, and we rise above it all. Let's pray. My Lord, thank you for giving us such a remarkable heritage. It really reaches into your very own nature. One of giving remarkable grace, astounding grace, from our founding fathers forward, to form a nation that's not just about itself, but served the nations. The very grace of God, the kindness and mercies and reconstructive effort in so many settings when devastation, in the aftermath of devastation of war, sacrificially rebuilding nation after nation. That's who we are. We thank you, Lord, because that's who you are. You take devastated lives, and in the name of Christ Jesus our Lord, you rebuild them to become really trophies of redemption and grace. That we are, and that is America. Amen.
Gonna have to have an episode about the wives left behind. My mother said, I knew what I married the morning after I married him. Don't you know to squeeze a tube of toothpaste at the bottom? You don't start in the middle. I knew what I had to look forward to from then on. Thank you all for coming. I hope we haven't bored you too much. I look forward to seeing as many as this and maybe more at Rapid City next year. Love you. Take care.